Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar. My name is Megan Donaldson, and I'm the Global Alumni Relations Officer here at Trinity Development and Alumni. Today, we're delighted to bring you a great panel of speakers, starting with our MC, Leonard Hobbs, who's the Director of Trinity Research and Innovation. He'll be leading a discussion with Diarmuid O'Brien, Chief Officer of Innovation and Enterprise here at Trinity, Jenny Melia of Enterprise Ireland's High Performance Startups Unit, and Declan Weldon, the Deputy Director at Trinity Research and Innovation. They'll be exploring how the landscape has changed for startups since COVID-19, the opportunities and challenges the pandemic has thrown up, and what the innovation landscape may look like in the months and years ahead. Before we start, I'd like to just run through a few logistics items for those of you who are new to Zoom. If you're joining us on Zoom and you'd like to view us in full screen, you can do so by clicking the button in the top right corner. If you need to adjust your audio setting, you can do that using the button in the bottom right. If you unfortunately need to leave the session, you can do so using the button in the bottom right. Sorry, the audio is in the bottom left. We do encourage you all to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do so and submit your questions using the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will respond to these following the discussion. If you experience any technical issues, not to worry, we are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it later on our YouTube channel. For those of you joining us on YouTube Live, if you need to mute or unmute the video, you can do so using the small speaker button. You can see it circled here in red on the bottom right of the screen. If you'd like to share the webinar with anybody, you can click on the share link. And to subscribe to our YouTube channel, simply click the red button. As I said, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're watching on YouTube Live and you'd like to submit questions, you can do so in the comment section, and this will be transferred to the speakers on Zoom. The talk will last around 30 minutes, and we'll follow that up with 15 minutes of Q&A. And so we should wrap up just before 2 p.m. Irish time. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded for later viewing. And if you're watching on Zoom, you'll get a link to the recording in a follow-up email, and the recording will be available on the TCD Alumni YouTube channel. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our panelists include Diarmuid O'Brien, who is Trinity's Chief Officer of Innovation and Enterprise. In this role, he is leading the establishment of Trinity's new innovation campus at the Silicon Docks and the establishment of the Grand Canal Innovation District. In addition, he is responsible for the development and the enhancement of the innovation and enterprise mission for the university. We'll also be joined by Declan Weldon, who is Deputy Director at Trinity Research and Innovation, where he leads the Office of Corporate Partnership and Knowledge Transfer at TRNI, which supports both industry engagement and the commercialization of Trinity research. The office reaches out to industry, the business community, and entrepreneurs to develop partnerships, enabling each to benefit from the world-leading teaching and research at Trinity. We're delighted to welcome Jenny Melia, who's the Manager of High Potential Startups in Enterprise Ireland. She's actually based at Trinity for several years as part of Enterprise Ireland's Research and Innovation team, and managed Enterprise Ireland's research and innovation programs between industry and third-level research institutes. She has worked with the EU Commission, advising on funding programs for EU nanotech, and spent a decade working with Enterprise Ireland's food and beverage clients, from startups to global players. And last but definitely not least, our MC for this afternoon's discussion, Leonard Hobbs. As I mentioned, Leonard is the Director of Research and Innovation here at Trinity, where he is responsible for the definition and implementation of the research, innovation, and enterprise strategy for the university. Leonard graduated from University College Cork, for which we'll have to forgive him, and has over 30 years of experience in the ICT sector, mostly with Intel. He'll now give us a bit of background about the work of Trinity Research and Innovation before we get to the main talk. So I'll hand over now to Leonard.
Thanks, Megan. Megan, you're just a UCC wannabe. Listen, delighted to be participating in this webinar today, and thank you all for joining. I can see we've over 100 participants so far, so it's great that we're able to use this technology to reach out to you, despite all the unfortunate difficulties we all find ourselves working through this pandemic. But it's great anyway that you're all able to join us today, and what I hope will be a very enjoyable and educational topic. The topic, of course, is very close to our heart at Research Innovation in Trinity in terms of startups, because in Trinity we have quite a unique setup in terms of how we manage research, all the way from being an idea to being an idea that transfers out to the world. In this case, through a startup company. So what we do in our unit is we have a research development arm that works with the academics to help them put together research proposals to find funding. We process over 1,200 proposals a year, and which brings in over 100 million of research funding to the university, which is just under a third actually of the university's research income, and is a real indication of just how important research is to this university. And indeed, I'd like to think it's at the heart of the university as what we're about. And then when all that research gets done and the PIs do their thing, so to speak, when they're ready to transfer that out to the outside world, then we step back in again, and that's where the Office of Corporate Partnership and Knowledge Exchange then gets involved in either working on the IP elements of some work, perhaps doing the patent if required, licensing to industry, engaging with industry indeed as well. We have a very, very strong industry engagement program, all the way then to creating campus companies, and we create about 5 or 6 per year, which would be a pretty high number given the size of our university. And indeed, I'm delighted to say that we may touch on it later today, that a lot of those companies in recent times in particular are high-performing startup units, which means that they're startup of high quality, they're starting to look to trade internationally, and they're of a certain size. But we'll get into that, I guess, today when we get the talk with the panelists. And just as, I guess, as an example, again, maybe mentioned a few times today, but a great example of a recent success in Trinity is you may have seen in the news in the last number of days, Inflazone, which was a pharmaceutical company working in inflammation, was acquired by Roche for nearly 400 million euro, and that all began with a research project in Trinity with Professor Luke O'Neill, and ended up as a very successful spin-out company. And indeed, as we'll be talking about today, we've many more of those in our pipeline, maybe not quite as big a success as that one, but certainly some very exciting ones, and hopefully we will touch on that today. And in the future, we would hope to have an opportunity to engage with you indeed in assisting perhaps some of those companies to go on to be as successful as Inflazone. So with that introduction, I'd perhaps go to the panel, and I could start with the first question to Jenny. So as our external member of the panel, so Jenny, delighted to have you here participating with us today. So just if I could ask you maybe just to get us started to comment on how this COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the startup world, and what you're seeing with the client companies that many client companies actually that Enterprise Ireland manage.
Okay, so and thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel today, Leonard. So look, if I go back to the start of the year and I go back to February, we were hosting our annual HPSU showcase in Croke Park. We 700 founders, investors, potential investors, all celebrating the 127 projects that we sponsored last year. We had just funded our new 6-year roadmap for developing high potential startups out of Ireland, and then COVID hit. So at that stage, COVID was still very much in China and on the other side of the world. So essentially, what did we see first of all? So first of all, companies, in terms of our HPSUs that were revenue generating, that came to a halt. International trade just stalled. Supply chains massively disrupted. We had immediate liquidity issues, and companies who were going to have liquidity challenges within 6 to 9 months. And of course, for us then on the startup side, the two things in particular that we'd be looking at in relation to the liquidity is, how would they keep their teams together? Because they had worked so hard to find these people, in the middle of what's an immense talent war, particularly across Dublin. And the second thing then for us really was around the investment landscape. How would this impact on investment? Because, at that stage of their growth, and particularly for the very disruptive companies, they're depending, on the investors and the VC community to support their growth, because that's the type of business model they have, investing a lot of money to grow the company, build out the R&D team, go international, and on the basis that the revenues, they're going to be slow to trickle in at the start, but then you get this scale up effect. So really, that's where we were coming from in terms of, like I say, managing the talent and the cash flow. And so one of the first things we would have done was got a small grant out into the system, but a very effective grant to help all of the HPSUs with their financial planning. and to actually work through really detailed plans in terms of what were their financial requirements for the next 12 to 18 months, so they could work through those with their investors and with us. And then the second piece for us was in terms of all the engagement we did with the Department of Enterprise and Revenue to ensure that our HPSUs and our pre-revenue HPSUs would be able to access the, at the time, what was the employment subsidy scheme, because that has been instrumental in providing a safety net for our companies on top of all of the other supports that are out there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jenny. Declan, turning to you then. So obviously lots of huge challenges there that Enterprise Ireland are working through. From a Trinity perspective, how did it impact the Trinity companies, either the ones that are ready, companies or the ones that are in the pipeline? How does it impact those?
I mean, we essentially have two pipelines. We have a pipeline of projects that are being built towards commercialization, towards being a company. And then we have a pipeline post-spin out. And it affected them all equally at the same time. And I'm glad Jenny brought it up in terms of the human factor, in terms of keeping people together. That was the first effect. I think depending, there's sectoral effects in there, depending on what type of project it was, whether it was ICT or what type of company, whether it was ICT based or pharmaceutical based, different effects. Because obviously with a project or a company that depends on doing clinical trials and access to labs, the immediate effect was very serious because everything stopped. Research basically stopped, except really in ICT, because you can still develop and do research and software at home. You essentially don't need a laboratory. So we saw an immediate effect on people. We saw an immediate effect on commercialization projects. Most of them halted in the initial phase. And on our companies that had spun out, we have 14 that have spun out in the past 3 years, almost. Different effects there. I think the access to labs, access to facilities all stopped. But I think we then saw, after an initial period of 2 or 3 months, and we went out, and Neil Gordon, who's a startup manager, went out and talked to everybody who's in the system, talked to all of our stakeholders and asked, how can we help? And we got a great deal of information back through that study. And we were able to help in various ways, but things started to recover after about 2 or 3 months, and we started to see activity pick back up with access to labs coming back in. But as Jenny has mentioned, I mean, one of the serious issues in particular with the companies that have just spun out, they're in this funding window between seed funding and the next round of funding, where they have negative cash flow. I mean, they aren't generating a lot of income. And that's a huge worry for the companies. So the companies that had investment from investors that had deep pockets, did well. And the University Bridge Fund certainly played a great part in that for companies funded under that. But others, it's still a very dangerous situation for them for the next 1 to 2 years.
Okay, it's actually challenging times ahead then. Jenny, to go back to you then. So COVID, of course, as well has created opportunities. There's probably the company did the app, the tracking app in Ireland's a great example of that. But are there other opportunities you think that will be created for companies who can take advantage perhaps of this strange world that we're all living in now, and indeed could be living in for some time? And are there any kind of success stories that you could share with us today?
So I suppose, Leonard, first thing to say is disruption. As well as bringing challenges, it always brings opportunities as well. And I think with COVID, we've seen a real shaking up, not in terms of how we're all working, but how we're all actually living. And we know that while we don't know what it looks like right now for the future, we know it is all going to be different. And we are probably, working towards more of a hybrid working environment, kind of all the things we talked about before, but now COVID has really accelerated it. So in terms of, so first of all, just to go back to what Declan said, it's not evenly impacted across the sectors. So that's the first thing. So when you look at exports out of Ireland up to the end of the first half of this year, we're actually 8% higher, because of the drive around the pharma and the medtech exports. But every night you're watching the news, you're seeing the devastation across the local domestic economy, the hospitality economy, and so on. And so our companies who were selling into, let's say, travel tech, into hospitality, into aviation. Really what we've been working with them to do is to find opportunities to help them diversify into other channels. Okay, that's the first thing. And then for our companies, let's say on the startup side, who are at that earlier stage, it has thrown opportunities up for them in the sense that for some of them, it has actually accelerated their business plan, because they had a great technology, they had a great product, they were making a good traction with customers, but now the customers absolutely need their technology so they can actually continue the business on the way they need to do it. And a good example would be one of our core companies that was in the news last week. The Taoiseach announced 100 new jobs there, WorkVivo, and that's essentially an online platform, a business, and I think it's fair to say a personal engagement system for colleagues right across an organization, sharing business goals, business values, but sharing in terms of then, like I say, building the team spirit and providing opportunities for innovation and collaboration and so on. Buy Me is another good example. They were basically providing a shopping tech platform to enable people to shop remotely. And then now, because now we're all trying to protect how many people we're coming into contact with and so on, that has absolutely accelerated for them. It's also brought them much faster into the UK, and they would have been in the media fairly recently around closing a successful funding round. I think companies as well who were working hard, and you would see some of this through your Trinity projects, companies who are working hard to access the HSE and the NHS with very innovative technologies. And sometimes when you have a very innovative technology, it can be hard to open doors there because you're educating people as you're going along as well, and you need change to be happening in the system. And they have got now real acceleration, for example, with the HSE and the NHS. And we would have put a working group together to help companies like that access the HSE easier, get them involved in some pilots and so on. So I think in terms of opportunities, anybody who has a potential COVID solution, be a product or a service at the moment, that's one opportunity. There's certainly another opportunity for us with our companies who have validated technologies, like I say, in terms of helping them diversify into new markets or new verticals. And the third piece then, and not to be underestimated at all, is what we need to do as an economy in terms of transitioning to low carbon and having a much greater focus on clean tech and green tech, and being able to make maximum use of the Commission's 1 billion Green Deal. And we'll be hosting a webinar now in EI towards the end of this month in terms of providing networking opportunities for companies and academics to get involved in those proposals, because there's a real opportunity here for us now to use what we need to do to drive a green economy to help us recover from COVID. And in the recent competitive start fund that we announced for our pre-seed companies, going back to Declan's point, where we have a bigger gap now at pre-seed and seed than we had 6 months ago. In that call, we would have called out specifically for clean tech and green tech projects to see what can we get moving there. And on the basis, that when as good projects come through this, we'll be able to link them into our established green tech team in Enterprise Ireland and our overseas teams and so on.
Okay, very interesting, Jenny. So I think there's a good lead in there in terms of what might be possible in the future in terms of spin-outs and support they might get. So what are we seeing from Trinity, do you think, so far, in terms of where opportunities are emerging in this COVID world, or this hopefully this what will soon be a post-COVID world?
I think as Jenny outlined very well, I mean, we are seeing some of our medtech spin-outs who had an initial stall because of COVID turn out to be very resilient and pushing ahead and getting trials back up and running. I'm talking about Provirum and Crevalve doing great work there, but also some of our companies doing a pivot and responding to COVID. Akara Robotics being one of them, Conor McGinn, making turning a robot into a sterilization unit, a UV sterilization unit. I think that was featured on Time Mag. Is a fantastic pivot in there, but also Terminus DB as well, who are very able to respond to this, looking at the criticality of supply chains and data systems, managing that. So we've seen Some of our portfolio companies pivot and respond to COVID. We've seen some of them demonstrate great resilience and confidence in the markets, but I think there's a lot of worry still in the system about, as Jenny said, in the pre-seed area, that very delicate phase that we're really looking for, something more to happen from government to support them. I think you look at the numbers of how much money was invested in seed funding the first half of the year versus last year, and it's down. It's still a big number. It's 500 million plus, but the devil is in the details. You dig in there and it's 2 or 3 big companies. And then the amount of funding going in that's, 5 million or less is down by 50%. And that's where the real damage will be done. All these companies that are in the pipeline are, prospective companies that are in the pipeline. We've all invested heavily in them through the state, through research and commercialization funding, and we can't now let them go. So there is, an appeal there to government to help support those very, very early stage companies that are unique in the system, but they're the ones who drive into new companies with, plenty of jobs and good jobs at that. So we're really looking to support those more than anybody else.
Okay, very interesting. Dermot, let me turn to you next, actually, in terms of leading on from those two contributions, particular as things are recovering, and the challenges that there will be and the gaps that will be that are emerging. But in terms of just in general speaking, in terms of the economy recovering, and I think we haven't really seen the hit on the economy yet, but it's going to come. And so, where do you see innovation in general actually playing a role in Ireland's recovery? What's going to have to be recovery now?
Yeah, well, I guess to start with, the most positive comment is that we've actually seen that innovation has already proved to be very resilient for the economy. So going back to March, we were looking at projections of 7.5% to 10% decrease in economic activity. We were projecting corporate tax coming down and personal tax coming down. And of course, they've all been hit, but much less than we would have anticipated, which goes back to the point I think Jenny made, which is that there's a whole cohort of companies already in Ireland, international, but also Irish, that have proved to be very resilient because they had innovation-enabled businesses that were able to withstand the impacts of COVID. So I think that's a positive starting place, but there's absolutely an awareness also that there's a cohort of businesses that need to think about how innovation can support their business to improve that resilience going forward. And that's, I think, matched with what we all know is going to be a slightly different environment that we work in. So this idea that COVID has accelerated digitalization, has accelerated the future of work, and has kind of brought to the mind a whole new range of technologies that were always on the horizon, but have really come much quicker to impact businesses, I think is going to be really clear. So I think there's going to be a real sense of understanding how businesses can adapt to that new world. I think we've all been impressed with how we've adopted to the kind of work at home model and the use of that kind of technology. I think the big concern for me is that that's been good to transition ongoing projects into this kind of current world. But as over the next 12 months, we need to develop new products, new services, and new kind of technologies. How do we do that in an environment where we don't have that connection and collaboration? So I think there's going to be a challenge in accelerating an innovation environment and just looking at how we're operating at the moment. And so the future of the office and that combination of collaborative space coupled with home working and that hybrid environment of managing both, I think is going to be a really critical piece in helping to differentiate Ireland as a place for innovation and a place to do business. I think also, we have to look at the supports there from an investment perspective. Both of those have been talked about by both Declan and Jenny, which is really looking at how we can support new company formation during that period. I think that's going to be a critical piece of our success. And I also think, we really need to look at this balance now, which we've had in Ireland, this challenge of recognizing and indeed being grateful for the large multinational investment that's here and how that's stimulated a very significant part of our economy, finding a way to balance that with new indigenous growth and getting that real economic spillover benefits from the larger companies into our indigenous company base. And that's something obviously that Trinity has been working hard to try and support around the idea of developing an innovation district here within our capital city, that is linked to the university, but more importantly finds at scale a capacity to connect the corporate innovation community we have with the startup and high potential startup community that we have already in strength and need to build.
Okay, thanks, Jimit. If I could just ask people maybe to start thinking about questions for our panel, because we're coming to the end of the formal questions. So I think it was mentioned at the start, there's the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen if you want to start typing in some questions, and we'll get to them in a little while. But just before I do, Jenny, go back to you on what Jim was describing there in terms of the economy recovering. What's EI's sort of strategy now, apart from the ones you've already described, but the broad EI strategy, I guess, in terms of how innovation is now becoming more front and center again, in terms of what this economy is going to need to really get back to the levels it was at.
So I suppose if I look at the broader AI strategy, as you referred to, Leonard, well, first of all, we've always had a huge focus on innovation in EI in terms of all of the work that my colleagues in our research and innovation division do across the third level, and in terms of linking the third level to our companies, which is a huge part of our mandate. And going back to what Declan was saying as well about the overall investment landscape, in Enterprise Ireland, not only are we a direct funder in projects, but we're also then, a major funder in terms of the seed and VC funds. So our last investment there would have been in the order of about 175 million. We have recently announced a 10 million top up to try and help, get a better balance between what's going into the new companies versus what we call our follow-on investments, where investors maybe feel, that there's a little bit less risk involved because they're already involved with the company and the company's already on its journey. So it's just to try and even out that balance a little bit better. And of course, a really important part for us then as a navigator is helping our startups and our most disruptive startups access the really exciting funding that is available now through the EU and through, the new blended offers, the grant, the equity offers. And we're doing a lot of work on that side of the house through our EU team. But in terms of our own strategy in EI, I mean, we were getting ready. Well, apart from doing a huge amount of work around Brexit and getting ready for everything we had coming down the tracks there as of the end of this year, we were just getting ready to go into our next 4-year strategy. So our last strategy was very much about helping companies expand their reach, as in geographically and across different sectors, and expand their scale, which is about growing internationally. And because of COVID and because of Brexit now, and like many organizations, we're really looking out now over the next 12 to 15 months and what we need to focus on there. And it really is very much around sustaining the companies and the jobs that we have, and particularly across the regions. I mean, over 60% of the new jobs that Enterprise Ireland clients created last year were outside Dublin. That's a huge part of the Enterprise Ireland agenda. And for us on the startup side of the house then, and feeding back into what Diarmuid was talking about, remote working, we've a strong focus on beefing up our regional infrastructure, because this is an opportunity. Now, this is an opportunity for all of our SMEs as well as our startups to be able to access talent in the regions, that it's not about everybody, having to commute to work for 1.5 or 2 hours or maybe 4 hours a day for some poor unfortunates. And so that people can actually work out of the regions and have, a career linked to one of our SMEs or linked to one of our startups. And then going back to what Diarmuid was saying as well, a big focus on digital transformation. How do we help our clients, build up their skills in that area? I mean, feedback from our clients in terms of consultations we've had around our plan for next year is how can we help them sell virtually and have better digital collateral and so on, because now there's a much stronger emphasis on marketing when they can't travel to overseas customers. And that's super important on the startup side and the young company side, where people are still building that relationship through face-to-face meetings. So next week, for example, 5th of October, we're launching International Markets Week, first time ever for it to go virtual. That will be open by the Taoiseach. We've over 700 clients registered, over 2,000 meetings with our overseas colleagues, and this is all about getting the companies out into the overseas markets virtually, holding on to what they have and building on it.
If I could ask a follow on that, actually, Jenny, so I can certainly see how things have gone well so far, but there's a certain momentum that was in the system, and companies probably had already engaged with people. But if they're trying to create new markets, connect to new people, how can they do that virtually? I mean, is that kind of realistic almost to think that you can do something on this kind of technology we're on, as opposed to go meet somebody? Because it is, new business is really a contact sport.
It is, you're absolutely right, it's a contact sport. I think to some extent, because the impact of COVID was so immediate and it was so immense, going back to what Dermot said, it has definitely forced that digital agenda, and I think people are actually maybe a little bit more willing to concede now that some things can be done on Zoom and on Teams and so on, where we would have actually traveled before. But in terms of our overseas offices, so we've 40 overseas offices now, spread right across the world. And I mean, our teams in those offices are constantly out connecting with potential buyers. Our inward buyer events that we would typically run. So last year, just to give you just an idea of numbers, we probably ran almost 300 trade events, trade meetings, inward buyer events last year. So our overseas team are bringing those virtual, and then and like everybody else, we're doing a little bit, of innovating around this to see what else we can do, and using what we call pathfinders, experts that we have in the markets in particular sectors, to be the people who can physically go in, have that face-to-face, and broker the introduction for our companies. And just some feedback from some of the younger companies that I was working with in the last 2 weeks. Their mantra was, you help us open the door. You get that door open for us, and we're happy once we go in, we're going to blow them away with our offer, and we'll take it from there. So our role is very much to open the doors, and a good example would be a pilot we've kicked off in Australia now with, I think we have 7 or 8 of our clients on it, and it's exactly that. It's using the pathfinders on the ground in Australia, because as you know, it could be Christmas now before anybody's actually going to be able to get into Australia, with the different restrictions and so on, Christmas at the earliest. So that's where we need to use the locals to be able to do that, and people who understand the EI agenda and what we're trying to do for the clients.
So local knowledge works best, I suppose, is the
local. Not well, it certainly helps.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jenny. Dermot, on a similar question, and there's one here in the came in as well, related to that. So almost in the reverse, do you think that the attractiveness of Ireland for the multinationals that we heavily rely upon, indeed the image behind you there has, you could probably point to lots of them, that come to Ireland, do you think the attractiveness is now going to change because of the remote capabilities? And how do you think the innovation district concept will hinder or help the attractiveness in the future?
Actually, I think the proposition for Ireland was already evolving quite strongly for international investment. So I think for 15, 20 years, it was predominantly driven through a kind of tax message that this was a financially favorable place to do business. But what we've clearly seen is that we've become much more successful than just being a place where we have a preferential tax environment, and companies have been reinvesting in here because of the proven track record of the kind of workforce that's here, because of our connection to Europe, and because of our kind of proven capacity to collaborate and to do business well. I think what's going to happen at the next wave is that what we've seen certainly, as I've visited different locations around the world, is that, and I think it was Jenny who mentioned it earlier, that there is a war for talent at the moment, and that's in two ways. It's about obviously that educated workforce, but it's also about having clusters of startups that can offer opportunity for acquisition and partnership is a really important part now of an international company's kind of investment checklist, And I think when we think about what we're trying to do here in Dublin, with an innovation district, it's really about trying to connect together all of the assets we have that make Ireland attractive for investment, and building them into a coherent story and building them into a coherent ecosystem that makes that visible to everyone from the outside. So, you know, those kind of ingredients include the kind of world-class research and innovation capability that exists within our universities and has really become transformed over the last 20 years of consistent investment from SFI. It's about building a kind of cluster at scale of our startup community that allows that kind of community to be visible to the international VC, the international investors, the international partners from a business perspective. So we already have in Dublin a large scale of startups, but they're dispersed across the city. So finding a way to coordinate that narrative in a way that builds that international visibility, I think is really important. And then obviously we've already got that cohort here of international companies that have demonstrated that Ireland is a great place to do business. What we need to make sure is that the next wave of technology-informed companies around automation, around AI, around augmented reality, around genomics or next generation pharmaceuticals still see Ireland as that place. And that's about building an environment in which we demonstrate we can do really interesting, innovative projects in those domains that allow them to feel comfortable that the talent is here, that the startup community is here, and that they can connect meaningfully with the universities. So I think we're already on that journey, and I've recognized for a long time that we needed to evolve our innovation offering to make Ireland a much more attractive place for international investment. And I think what we're seeing with COVID is that, you know, to some extent, we have to accelerate that strategic offering to make sure as FDI becomes on the agenda again, probably in about 12 to 18 months' time, that we are coming out of COVID with a proposition that says that we have a plan and a strategy for the next 10 or 15 years as a country that's going to make this a safe place to invest for the next, you know, generation. And I'd like to think that's the kind of projects that we're pushing forward at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Dermot. Just again to say to our guests that we're now in the phase where I encourage you to load up your questions. And I'm going to go to one of those now. I'm going to put this one to you, Declan, and that is, you know, if you look at the way how Trinity responded to the COVID crisis in terms of its academic community, there were some really good contributions from our academics on the various TV chat shows, participating in various government committees. But now as we're coming, well, one would like to think starting to turn around or hopefully soon come out of it, what role do you think the university should play in the future? Is there a specific role the university should play in terms of contributing to this recovery? What responsibilities do we have?
I think the first point you say there, I think the spokesperson, the spokespeople that the universities en masse have provided through COVID has been fantastic. I mean, there's been great thought leadership coming from, you know, two handfuls of academics, starting off with Luke, and there's plenty more in that scene. And I think we need to continue that. I mean, it's really, really important. But what I would emphasize, and it's a long story, what I would emphasize is that virtually all of these companies that we create are based upon intellectual property that's based upon investigator-led research done at the university. Virtually all of them have that root. And I think Infosome was a wonderful example of that. I mean, that, you know, Luke O'Neill's been working in this area for 30 years. It wasn't an overnight thing. And the initial work that he did that led specifically to Infosome success started out as an SFI investigator grant in 2013, you know. So this stuff works. Where we invest in, some people call it basic research, it does work, but it is a long game. And I think the university needs to keep the pressure on the funding bodies to make sure that funding of investigator-led research is done to the appropriate level. Right now it's not, and we need to keep that pressure up. The second thing really is to encourage more of our academic colleagues to do more inventorship, to get involved more in what we do. And then the third piece I'd add is that, you know, we have a wonderful team in TR&I whose job it is to get all this stuff commercialized, be it through licensing or be it through spinouts. And we're turning out a very high rate of HPSUs from our campus companies at the moment. And we need to take another step up. I mean, we've reached a good level of performance, but I think the challenge really is how do we create more really good jobs in Ireland, more really good companies that form the basis of Ireland's recovery. And I think that step up that we need to do will happen over the next 12 to 24 months. We're in a good place to start it. So I think if we combine all those three things together from Trinity's point of view, we've a fighting chance of doing well from this.
As a follow-on, Declan, from a question here from Andrew Cox, thank you, Andrew, is around how can a founder, a graduate founder, get involved with Trinity. So, as you know, we have a very, very proud tradition in Trinity of having a huge amount of graduates who go on to form companies more so than any other European university. So, so how do we bring them back? How do we spin them back in? So, how would we do that in the next number of years?
I mean, Trinity is organised in a way that there is a single point of contact for anyone who is looking to do that, and that's our office. That's TR&I. So you can contact our office at any level, and you'll end up speaking to me or one of my team on your idea, on your proposal, and there's a wealth of experience there. And whether the best line is to steer it back into the university or to go a different route, we have all the connections with our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland and with the VC community. So the first thing to do is pick up the phone, get in touch with us. Yeah. Okay.
And just for people online, there is in the chat, you'll see there's links to the various different groups there that we're talking today. So the TCD /innovation page is there for you. That'll get you into Declan's team. Okay. So another a question is again a very specific one. This is from Sarsha. So thank you, Sarsha. So Sarsha would like to know if there are other companies involved in other than pharmaceutical and technology, which we've been talking about a bit today. Are there other companies that are doing well in this environment? I'm thinking like EdTech, for instance. I've seen some interesting things there. So maybe that's for you, Jenny. It's just the broadest view. What sectors are taking advantage of these new opportunities?
Okay, so I think a sector, just in terms of one that comes to mind now, where we've done a lot of work through our UK office, is the offshore wind sector. And so this is an area now where we're seeing a massive amount of growth. And I think as well, in terms of, some of the news that you would have seen come through, from the large oil and gas players, and their much faster transition towards clean and towards green has really, I think, accelerated that agenda. So, one of the things we would be doing now in EI at the moment is actually pulling together clusters of our companies. So we have companies who are servicing different sectors and different channels at the moment, and we would be looking to see there, who has technologies, who has products, who has engineering that could be applied, in the offshore wind sector, and then how do we work with them to prep them to move into, be it the UK market and the Eurozone market there. In terms of some of our companies then on the fintech side, in terms of cashless payments, and digital banking and so on, that's an area that's growing strongly. There's certain segments of the construction sector growing very strongly because of the pent-up demand that was there post-lockdown. And I think, like I say, a lot of people are probably zoning in on the life sciences side at the moment in terms of, let's say, the diagnostics, the reagents and so on. But I think one of the most exciting projects that I saw come across our desk in EI last year, and I know it's one that you guys were linked with and are involved with in Trinity, and it's a project called One Project on the healthcare side, and it's around atrial fibrillation and analysis techniques and therapies involving imaging technologies and artificial intelligence. And there was huge growth in AI and machine learning before COVID, and that is set to continue. It's how you actually, I think, overlay and interlink those technologies with where we have now our immediate and our medium term problems, and that we can actually use them as solutions, maybe rather than some of the further out things. that we were looking at. But certainly in EI now, over the context of our new strategy, we will have a strong focus, like I say, on clean tech and green tech and what we can do there.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Jim, there's a question here about the Grand Canal project, and again, I think you've got the image behind you there, so maybe that's what prompted it. So it's from Cecil and SF Sanderson. So thanks again for the question. But the question is just if you could just maybe give an update on the Grand Canal project. It's obviously a very ambitious project that Trinity has been driving, and I know you personally have been driving it. So maybe if you could just give our audience just a quick update on where that project is at, and particularly again as it's navigating through these challenging times.
Sure. So maybe just to capture for a second what the project is for those who might not be aware, but Trinity has a 5.5 acre site that we have not yet developed right in the middle of the kind of Silicon Docks part of the city, surrounded by the kind of 60 to 80,000 people who are now working there for the kind of large tech companies or professional service firms or fintech firms. And the ambition for the project is to develop a innovation campus that brings together the best of what we can offer in this country from an academic research perspective, from a high potential startup perspective, and from a corporate innovation perspective. So we have this kind of microcosm of the best that we have in Ireland on a single campus in the center of our city that can really catalyze an innovation district within our city that gives it a visibility and a prominence internationally that will attract investment and talent and enable us to really get the best out of what we're doing here in the country. Where we are with the project at the moment is that in the next few weeks, we'll apply for the first planning permission for this project. So we have a 5,500 square foot innovation hub that will be developed over the next 12 months or so through support we've had from Enterprise Ireland through the Regional Enterprise Development Fund and from the Urban Region Development Fund. So that will be a place immediately, and go back to previous questions for graduates who are looking to place a company or to connect back with the university and are looking for a space to locate their company. That will provide an immediate opportunity for entrepreneurs, startups, corporates, all to take space on the campus and begin to engage with the university and with the vision. The next phase of the project is we are going through the development of what's called a strategic assessment report, which is part of the public spending code that is about getting formal buy-in to the project through the state. And so earlier this year, there was a report from the Grand Canal Innovation District Advisory Group, which strongly endorsed the delivery of this vision for the country. And we're now moving through the next phases of that. So I hope, within the next 12 months, you'll see a significant change to the site that will give people a sense of real opportunity and a real sense of the site beginning to play the role that we think it can play. And then you're probably looking at a window of about 4 to 5 years post that for the kind of first phase of the big development to come through.
Okay, that's very exciting. So we're coming to the end now, but just maybe one more question. And good morning to Paul McGuire from Philadelphia. Thanks for joining us, Paul, at this ungodly hour for you. So it's a question for Jennifer, but we may have touched on it already, Jennifer, but it's around the concept of virtual marketing and where do you see a role for that potentially, certainly in the in accessing the all-important US marketplace. And I assume what Paul means by that is as well as using the personal touch that you described earlier with the local knowledge and the opening of doors, is there a role for new ways of marketing people's companies in the future, I believe?
Well, I think, Leonard, going back to where we started in terms of, looking at COVID related opportunities, this is one of the opportunities. And even in terms of, like I say, whatever things look like in 15, 18, 24 months, we're definitely still going to be working through some kind of a hybrid model. And I think that's where we can have the best of both worlds then in terms of, let's call it our more traditional marketing and our virtual marketing. The US is a hugely important market for us. We saw a 15% increase in our exports in 2019, and part of that, you know, was in terms of trying to reduce our dependency in terms of the level of exports to the UK. And last year we would have helped, I think it was 75 of our clients open a new presence in the US, new boots on the ground. Ireland would actually be the 9th biggest FDI investor into the US. So we talk about the multinationals coming to Ireland and growing their businesses here. But I mean, we have our Irish companies then going the other direction as well. And going back to what Dermot was talking then about with the ecosystem, and just not to lose the opportunity, you know, from meeting, you know, with one of those multinationals last year. They had a huge interest in what was happening in Ireland in terms of innovation. We met with them to present to them what HPSUs and what SMEs were doing in their space, in terms of, you know, some high level things that we could share with them, because it's very important for them when they're choosing a location where they can set up, that they understand, you know, that there's a lot of innovative thinking, you know, there is that degree of flexibility, that degree of agility. And my own experience in terms of working with some of the large companies was, you know, they could not speak highly enough of their Irish management teams and the quality and the caliber of their management teams here in Ireland. So I think that is part of that overall Ireland Inc. message that we want to sell, that we have, you know, a very, very strong ecosystem that's second to none. And it's certainly a big part of our HPSU strategy as well, that we have an ecosystem here to support founders to start and scale that will equal, you know, an ecosystem anywhere across the world. And I think sometimes as well we can get very focused on what's that initial funding that's there from an investment perspective, but you do have to take that more holistic view. And, you know, I'd be conscious in EI that when we invest in a company, we're there for the long haul. We see ourselves as a partner, and some of the companies I've worked with over the years that were startups 20 years ago, when Julie, our CEO, was actually their DA. So and I think that is something, you know, we try and build in through our messaging. And going back to Paul's point then, in terms of linking back into us, you know, Paul, if you drop me a line afterwards, you know, we can link you into our US office there. That's one thing we can do. And then we can talk to you in terms of, you know, if there is something that you're thinking of developing here or fleshing out as an idea, you know, what supports we can link you in through Enterprise Ireland, because we're working with our colleagues in the local enterprise offices and our colleagues in Dublin, for example, in DBIC, and the other 3 incubation centres as well around the country.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So we're going to leave it there, folks. So before I close my piece, I just want to thank my panelists, Jenny, Dermot and Declan, and indeed to you as well for your questions. And just before I do hand back to Megan, I would like to point out that, you know, Jenny in her piece of opening did mention a Cork company's done very well through COVID, and Hugh Smitty from Cork has also reminded us of another one, Green Rebel Marine, which is an offshore company that just started up during the week. So they are now, Jenny. Okay, and thank you, Megan, for that early reference to Cork people. So with that, I'll hand back to Megan and give you the last word.
Thank you very much, Leonard. It's not unlike you to get a plug in there for Cork at the end. Always enjoyable. I'd really just say a huge thank you to all our panelists today. It's been a fascinating talk. It's been great to hear about the innovation happening, not just at Trinity, but across the sectors. And just to be reminded that, you know, when the news is full of dark things, that there's a lot of potential and opportunities still out there at the minute, particularly in terms of innovation, even with the current health situation. So thank you for that positive attitude as well. I'd also like to thank the team here at Trinity Development and alumni who have, as usual, played a blinder in putting this together. So thank you, guys. And of course, all of you listening at home today, or from your office, or from your cars, wherever you happen to be, thank you very much for joining us and for all your really, really great questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to them all, but we did our best. So I'd just like to share my screen with you there, because there's a few interesting links if there's anything you'd like to follow up with. So before we go, a few additional bits. If you'd like to get in touch with us here at the alumni office, you can reach us at alumni@tcd.ie. That's if you have any questions about the activity of the office, or if you'd like to reach out and connect with any of our speakers, just give us a shout at alumni@tcd.ie. If you enjoyed today's webinar and want more information on any of the topics discussed. You see a few links there at the bottom, and they were also shared in the chat. And you can learn more about the great work being done by Declan Leonard and the team at TRNI by clicking www.tcd.ie/innovation. That will take you to Trinity Research and Innovation. If you'd like to discover more about the work of Enterprise Ireland and what they're doing around high performance startups, you can visit them at globalambition.ie/HPSU. And as Dearman was talking a little bit about the Grand Canal Innovation District, which is an incredible initiative and a really exciting change for the docks that Trinity is hugely involved in. You can learn more about that by visiting www.tcd.ie/innovation-district. And finally, as I said, you can reach out to us at alumni@tcd.ie if you have any further questions. Our next webinar in the Inspiring Ideas at Trinity series will be in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 7th of September. Oh, the date is wrong there on the slide. I apologize. It's Wednesday, the 7th of October. Wednesday, the 7th of October at 1:00 p.m. We'll be looking at 3 striking new additions to the Trinity campus with insights from the architects who designed them. As you can see there, our topic will be building innovation at Trinity from the historic to the future campus. And we'll be joined by Valerie Mulvin and Neil McCullough of McCullough Mulvin Architects, who built the Long Room Hub and are finishing Trinity's newest building on Printing House Square, which opens in the next month or 2. We'll also be joined by Wayne Rothwell of Scott Helen Walker, who's one of the project leads on Trinity's marvelous new business school down next to the rugby pitch. And we'll also be joined by Sandra O'Connell, a Trinity alumna and Director of Architecture and Communications at the Royal Institute of the Architects of Ireland. So it's a really exciting lineup. And for all of us who love Trinity's campus, this should be a really interesting one, and I'd encourage you to tune in. The registration link for the next webinar will be sent out by email to all our alumni next week, so do keep an eye on your inboxes. And in the meantime, thank you once again for joining. Take care of yourselves and stay safe.